The rain was falling in sheets, turning the city streets into rivers of cold, unforgiving water. And there, on that corner, a man in a $3,000 suit made a decision that would change everything, not just for the trembling girl he was about to help, but for himself, his company, and everyone who had ever doubted the power of kindness. But here's the thing about that night. Here's what nobody could have predicted. The girl he saved wasn't just any girl. And the secret she carried would expose a betrayal so deep, so carefully hidden, that it would shake the very foundations of a billion-dollar empire. This is the story of Richard Thornton, a CEO who had everything, and was about to lose it all, and of Emma, a girl who had nothing, except the one thing that could save him. Richard Thornton wasn't always wealthy. He grew up in a small apartment with a single mother who worked double shifts just to keep food on the table. He remembered the nights when the electricity would get cut off because she couldn't pay the bill. He remembered wearing shoes with holes in them to school, pretending he didn't notice the other kids laughing. But Richard was determined. He studied harder than anyone else. He worked 3 jobs through college, and when he graduated, he had one goal: to build something so successful that no one in his family would ever go hungry again. 25 years later, Thornton Technologies was one of the most successful tech companies in the country. They developed software that hospitals used to save lives. They created programs that helped students learn. They built systems that made businesses run more efficiently. Richard had done it. He had built his empire. He had a beautiful penthouse, a driver, a team of people who called him Sir, and looked at him with respect. But there was something missing. His wife had passed away 3 years ago. Cancer, the same disease his company's medical software was designed to help treat. The irony wasn't lost on him. All that technology, all that money, and he still couldn't save the person who mattered most. Since then, Richard had thrown himself into work. He arrived at the office before dawn and left long after dark. He told himself it was dedication. But, deep down, he knew the truth. Work was the only thing that kept him from feeling the emptiness. On this particular night, Richard had stayed late at the office, reviewing quarterly reports. The numbers were good, better than good. Thornton Technologies was on track to have its most profitable year ever. But something had been bothering him lately. Small things, discrepancies in the accounting, delays in projects that should have been completed months ago. His chief operating officer, Daniel Barrett, always had explanations, always had excuses. But Richard had built his entire career on trusting his instincts, and his instincts were telling him something wasn't right. He dismissed the thought as paranoia. Daniel had been his right-hand man for 15 years. They had built the company together. Daniel was family. Richard gathered his things and headed for the elevator. His driver, Thomas, would be waiting in the parking garage. Same routine every night, same life every day. But this night would be different. The rain had come out of nowhere. One moment, the sky was clear. The next, it was as if the heavens had opened up and decided to drown the city. Richard stood under the awning of his building, watching his driver pull the car around. The streets were mostly empty. Just a few people running for cover, newspapers over their heads, umbrellas turned inside out by the wind. That's when he saw her. She was walking, not running, walking, down the sidewalk, completely exposed to the rain. She couldn't have been more than 19 or 20. Her clothes were thin, soaked through, clinging to her small frame. She had no umbrella, no jacket, just a worn backpack over her shoulder, and a look in her eyes that Richard recognized immediately. It was the look of someone who had given up. He had seen that look before, in his mother's eyes, after his father left, in the mirror after his wife died. The girl reached the corner and stopped. She stood there, rain streaming down her face, staring at nothing. She wasn't waiting for the light to change. She wasn't looking for shelter. She was just standing there, like she had nowhere to go, like she had no reason to move. Something inside Richard broke. Thomas pulled the car up, opening the door for him. "Mr. Thornton, we should hurry. The weather's getting worse." But Richard wasn't listening. He was already walking toward the girl. "Excuse me," he called out, raising his voice over the sound of the rain. "Miss?" She didn't respond. She just kept staring ahead, water dripping from her chin, her shoulders shaking. From the cold, or from something else? Richard reached her and touched her arm gently. She flinched, looking at him with startled eyes. Up close he could see how young she was, how tired. Dark circles under her eyes, cheekbones too sharp, suggesting she hadn't eaten properly in days. But there was something else there too. Intelligence. A spark that hadn't quite been extinguished. "You're going to get sick out here," Richard said softly. "Can I help you?" The girl shook her head, taking a step back. "I'm fine." She wasn't fine. That much was obvious. "At least let me give you my umbrella," Richard offered. Then he realized he didn't have one. He had left it at the office. He thought for a moment, then made a decision. "Come with me," he said. "I'll take you somewhere warm. You can dry off, have something to eat. No strings attached. I can't walk away and leave you here like this." The girl studied him with suspicious eyes. Richard couldn't blame her. A strange man in a suit offering to take her somewhere in a storm. She had every right to be cautious. "I know how this looks," Richard admitted, "but I promise you, I just want to help. My name is Richard Thornton. I run a company down the street. You can look me up on your phone if you want. I'm not trying to hurt you. I've just been where you are, a long time ago. And someone helped me when I needed it most. I'm trying to pay it forward." Something shifted in the girl's expression. The suspicion didn't disappear entirely, but it softened. After a long moment she nodded. "My name is Emma," she said quietly. Richard smiled. "Nice to meet you, Emma. Now let's get you out of this rain." 20 minutes later, Emma was sitting in a booth at a small diner a few blocks from Richard's office. The place was nothing fancy, just an old-fashioned establishment with red vinyl seats, fluorescent lights, and the smell of coffee and fried food in the air. But it was warm and dry, and that was what mattered. Thomas had gone to park the car, and Richard had ordered 2 cups of coffee and a plate of everything. Eggs, toast, bacon, pancakes. Emma had protested at first, saying she wasn't hungry, but when the food arrived, she ate like she hadn't had a proper meal in weeks. Richard watched her without saying anything. He knew better than to ask too many questions right away. People talked when they were ready. Pushing only made them retreat further. After she had finished eating, Emma looked up at him with those tired, intelligent eyes. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Richard considered the question carefully before answering. "Because I remember what it's like to feel invisible, to feel like nobody in the world cares whether you live or disappear, and I remember how much it meant when someone finally saw me." Emma was quiet for a long time. Then slowly she began to talk. She told him about growing up in foster care, about bouncing from home to home, never staying anywhere long enough to feel like she belonged. She told him about the one foster family that had been kind to her, an older couple named Margaret and Henry Wallace, who had encouraged her education and made her feel for the first time like she had a future. She told him about working her way through community college, studying computer science and business, about her dream of starting her own tech company someday, building something that helped people. And then she told him about what had happened. Her foster parents, Margaret and Henry, had recently passed away, within months of each other. Heart attack for him and grief for her, people said. They had left Emma a small inheritance, just enough to cover her remaining tuition and start fresh somewhere new. But someone had taken it, someone Emma had trusted. "There was a man," Emma said, her voice flat, emotionless, the way people speak when they're trying not to feel anything. "He said he could invest the money for me, make it grow. He had all these credentials, all these references. He seemed so legitimate." She paused, staring at her empty coffee cup. "By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. The money was gone. He was gone. And I was left with nothing. Richard felt anger rising in his chest, not at Emma, at the world that had been so cruel to her, at the predator who had taken advantage of a grieving, vulnerable young woman. "Did you report it?" he asked. "Go to the police?" Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I tried. They said it was a civil matter, that I had signed documents agreeing to the investment, that unless I could prove actual fraud—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "I didn't have money for a lawyer. I didn't have anyone to help me fight, so I just gave up." Richard leaned forward. "Emma, listen to me. You are not going to give up, not tonight, not ever. Whatever happened to you, it doesn't define you. It doesn't determine your future." "You don't understand," Emma said. "I lost everything. My apartment, my job. I've been sleeping in shelters for the past month. The only thing I have left is this." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a worn laptop. It was old, scratched, held together with tape in some places. But she handled it like it was precious. "This was the only thing I had that he couldn't take," she said. "Margaret gave it to me before she passed. She said it would help me build my future." Richard looked at the laptop, then back at Emma. An idea was forming in his mind. "Where were you headed tonight?" he asked. "When I found you?" Emma was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Nowhere," she said. "I wasn't going anywhere. I was just walking, waiting for the rain to wash everything away." Richard's heart ached. He understood now. She hadn't been walking through the storm. She had been ready to let the storm take her. "Emma," he said firmly, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. Your life is not over. You have skills, you have intelligence, you have drive. Those are things that can't be taken from you, and I am going to help you get back on your feet." Emma looked at him with something that might have been hope. Fragile, hesitant, but real. "Why?" she asked again. "You don't even know me?" Richard smiled sadly. "Because 30 years ago I was standing in the rain too, and someone stopped for me. Now it's my turn to stop for someone else." That night Richard did something he had never done before. He checked Emma into a hotel near his office and gave her enough money to last a month. He told her to rest, to recover, to take care of herself. And he gave her his business card, telling her to call him when she was ready. "Ready for what?" she asked, confused. "For a fresh start," Richard replied. "I can't promise you anything yet, but if you're as talented as I think you are, there might be a place for you at my company. A chance to rebuild." Emma stared at the business card like it was a lifeline, which, in many ways, it was. "Thank you," she said. And for the first time since he'd met her, Richard saw her smile. It was small, tentative, almost painful, like a muscle that hadn't been used in too long. But it was there. "Get some rest," Richard said. "Tomorrow is a new day." Richard went home that night feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Not the kind that came from closing deals or reviewing spreadsheets, but something deeper. Something human. He barely slept. His mind kept returning to Emma. To her story, to her eyes, to the way she had talked about her foster parents, Margaret and Henry Wallace, computer science, investments, fraud. Something nagged at the back of his mind, but he couldn't quite identify it. The next morning, Richard arrived at the office earlier than usual. His assistant, Carol, looked surprised to see him. "Mr. Thornton, you're here already. Is everything all right?" "Fine, Carol. Just have a lot on my mind." He paused at her desk. "Actually, I need you to do something for me. I need you to find everything you can about a man who may have been running investment schemes targeting vulnerable people, young people, people without family or resources." Carol frowned. "What kind of investigation is this?" "Personal," Richard said. "Confidential, just between us." Carol nodded. "Of course, sir. I'll start looking right away." Richard went into his office and tried to focus on work, but his thoughts kept drifting. Something about Emma's story had struck a chord, triggered a memory he couldn't quite access. It felt like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Or that fit too well. Around noon, his door opened and Daniel Barrett walked in. Daniel was everything a chief operating officer should be: polished, confident, charming. He had a smile that could sell ice to an Eskimo and a handshake that made people feel like they were the most important person in the room. Richard had trusted him completely. For 15 years, Daniel had been his partner in everything. Together they had taken Thornton Technologies from a small startup to a billion-dollar enterprise. But lately, Richard had noticed things, small things. Daniel's reluctance to share certain financial reports, his insistence on handling specific clients personally, the way he sometimes seemed nervous when Richard asked too many questions. "Richard, good morning," Daniel said, settling into the chair across from Richard's desk. "I've been looking at the quarterly numbers, impressive as always." "Thank you, Daniel. It's been a good year." "Better than good. We're up 15% from last quarter. The new medical software is selling beyond projections. The board is thrilled." Richard nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. "Daniel, I've been meaning to ask you about something, the Patterson account. I noticed some discrepancies in the billing." Daniel's smile flickered, just for a moment, but Richard caught it. "Discrepancies? I'm not sure I follow." "Nothing major, just some numbers that didn't add up. I'm sure there's a simple explanation." Daniel laughed, but it sounded forced. "Richard, you know how complicated these large accounts can be. Multiple invoices, different departments, adjustments for changes in scope. I'll have the team look into it and get you a full breakdown by end of week." "That would be helpful," Richard said, keeping his voice neutral. "Thank you." After Daniel left, Richard sat in silence for a long time. The uneasy feeling in his stomach had grown stronger. He picked up the phone and called Carol. "How's that research coming?" "Actually, sir, I found something interesting. There's a pattern of complaints filed over the past 5 years against someone matching your description. Multiple victims, all young people, all with similar stories. The investigator's name is Detective Sarah Chen. She works for the Financial Crimes Unit. I can get you her contact information." "Please do," Richard said, right away. That afternoon, Emma called. She sounded different, stronger, more focused. A night of sleep in a real bed and a full stomach had clearly done wonders. "Mr. Thornton, it's Emma. I just wanted to thank you again for everything. I've been doing a lot of thinking and I want to take you up on your offer, if it still stands." "It absolutely still stands," Richard said. "Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? I'd like to introduce you to some people, see where your skills might fit best." "I'll be there," Emma promised. "But there's something I need to tell you first, something I didn't mention last night." Richard felt that strange sense of premonition again. "What is it?" "The man who took my money, I didn't just lose my inheritance, he also stole something else, documents, financial records. They belonged to my foster father, Henry. Before he retired, he worked as an accountant for a large company. He had files on his personal computer, records of transactions, evidence of some kind of irregularities. He was worried about them. He told Margaret before he died that something wasn't right, that someone was stealing." Richard's blood ran cold. "Emma, what company did Henry work for?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Emma spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "Thornton Technologies." The world stopped. Richard sat in his chair, phone pressed to his ear, unable to breathe. "What did you say?" "Henry Wallace worked for your company," Emma repeated. "He was in the accounting department for 12 years before he retired. He never talked about his work much, but in the last few months before he died, he was different, worried. He kept saying he should have spoken up sooner, that he was afraid of what they might do." "They?" Richard asked. "Who is they?" He never said, but he had files on his laptop, old files, encrypted. I never opened them. I didn't even know the password. But the man who stole my money, he took the laptop too. The old one, the one Henry used. He left me this one because it was useless to him. But Henry's laptop, it had everything. Richard's mind was racing. Henry Wallace, accountant, Thornton Technologies, files showing irregularities, theft of documents, and Daniel Barrett, who had insisted on handling all financial matters personally for the past 3 years, who had seemed nervous when Richard asked questions, who had access to every account, every record, every secret. "Emma," Richard said carefully, "I need you to come to my office right now, not tomorrow. Now, and bring everything you have, any documents, any records, anything that might be connected to your foster father's work." "Is something wrong?" "I'm not sure yet, but I think you might have just given me the piece I've been missing." An hour later, Emma was sitting in Richard's private office, her worn laptop open on his desk. Richard had called in his head of security, Marcus Cole, and his chief legal counsel, Jennifer Walsh. He had told them only that a potential security threat had been identified and that discretion was essential. He had not told them about Daniel, not yet, not until he was certain. "Emma, you said Henry's laptop was stolen, but do you have anything else? Notes, emails, anything he might have left behind?" Emma thought for a moment. "He gave me a USB drive before he died. He said it was a backup of important documents, just in case. He made me promise to keep it safe. I never opened it. I thought it was just sentimental, you know? His way of passing something on." "Do you have it with you?" Emma reached into her backpack and pulled out a small, worn USB drive. It looked ancient, the kind of technology people used a decade ago. But when Richard plugged it into his secure computer and began scrolling through the files, his heart nearly stopped. There were spreadsheets, hundreds of them, financial records from Thornton Technologies going back 7 years. And in those records, carefully highlighted and annotated by Henry Wallace's meticulous hand, was evidence of systematic embezzlement. Someone had been skimming money from the company for years, small amounts at first, a few thousand here, a few thousand there. But over time, the numbers grew, hundreds of thousands, then millions, hidden in inflated vendor contracts, buried in fake expense reports disguised as bonuses for employees who didn't exist. And every single transaction had been approved by the same person, Daniel Barrett. Richard stared at the screen, his face pale. 15 years of friendship, of trust, of partnership. And all of it had been a lie. "How much?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jennifer Walsh scrolled through the documents, her expression grim. "Based on these records, we're looking at approximately $23 million, possibly more. There are accounts referenced here that we'd need forensic accountants to fully trace." "23 million," Richard repeated. It was more money than most people saw in a lifetime. And Daniel had stolen it while smiling at him across the conference table, while toasting to their success at company parties, while calling him a friend. Marcus Cole spoke up. "Sir, we need to contact the authorities. This is criminal fraud on a massive scale." "I know," Richard said, "but we need to do this carefully. If Daniel suspects we're onto him, he'll run, or worse, he'll destroy evidence." He turned to Emma, who had been sitting quietly through all of this, her face pale. "Emma, I don't know how to thank you. You may have just saved my company." Emma shook her head. "I didn't do anything. Henry did. He's the one who gathered all this evidence. He knew something was wrong, and he tried to protect you, even though he was scared, even though it could have cost him everything." "Why didn't he come forward while he was alive?" Emma's eyes glistened. "He was afraid. He said the person responsible was powerful, connected, that nobody would believe an old accountant over a respected executive, but he couldn't let it go. He said it was eating him up inside, knowing what was happening and not being able to stop it. Mas." Richard felt a wave of grief for a man he had never properly known. Henry Wallace had been a loyal employee, an honest man, and in the end, he had tried to do the right thing. He just hadn't lived long enough to see it through. "Well," Richard said quietly, "we're going to finish what he started." The next 48 hours were chaos. Richard worked with his security team and legal counsel to build a case against Daniel that was airtight. They brought in forensic accountants who traced the stolen money to offshore accounts in 3 different countries. They documented every fraudulent transaction, every forged signature, every lie that Daniel had told. And then they went further, because as they dug deeper, they discovered something even more disturbing. Daniel hadn't just been stealing money. He had been selling company secrets to competitors, proprietary software, research data, client information. For years, he had been feeding Thornton Technologies' most valuable assets to their rivals, collecting payments under the table, while watching Richard work himself to exhaustion, trying to figure out why they kept losing bids, why competitors always seemed one step ahead. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst came when Richard discovered the connection between Daniel and the man who had stolen Emma's inheritance. His name was Victor Crane, a professional con artist with a history of targeting vulnerable people, recent orphans, elderly widows, anyone with a little money and not enough protection. Daniel had been using Victor for years as a fixer, a cleaner. Whenever there was a problem that needed to disappear, a whistleblower who asked too many questions, a witness who might talk, Victor made it go away. Henry Wallace had been one of those problems. When Henry started asking questions about the financial irregularities, Daniel had panicked. He couldn't risk the old accountant talking, so he had sent Victor to take care of it. Victor hadn't hurt Henry directly. He was smarter than that. Instead, he had befriended Emma, learned about her connection to her foster father, and waited. When Henry died of natural causes, Victor moved in. He stole the laptop with the evidence. He took Emma's inheritance to ensure she had no resources to fight back, and he disappeared, leaving no trace. He had thought the secret was buried forever. He had been wrong. The confrontation happened on a Thursday afternoon. Richard called an emergency board meeting, claiming it was about the quarterly projections. Daniel arrived looking confident, charming as always, completely unaware that his entire world was about to collapse. The boardroom was full. All the executives, the company lawyers, and in the corner, Detective Sarah Chen from the Financial Crimes Unit, along with 2 federal investigators. Richard stood at the head of the table, his face expressionless. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I know everyone's busy, so I'll get straight to the point." He pressed a button, and the conference room screen lit up with the first of Henry Wallace's documents. "Over the past 3 days, we've discovered evidence of systematic fraud within our company. Embezzlement totaling over $23 million. Sale of proprietary information to competitors. Conspiracy to obstruct justice." The room was silent. Executives exchanged confused looks. Daniel's smile had frozen on his face. Richard continued, his voice steady. "All of these crimes trace back to one person, someone I trusted, someone I called a friend." He turned to look directly at Daniel. "The game is over, Daniel." For a moment, Daniel didn't react. His expression was blank, unreadable. Then, slowly, his facade cracked. His jaw tightened. His eyes went cold. "Richard," he said smoothly, "I don't know what you think you found, but I can assure you—" "Save it," Richard interrupted. "I have 7 years of financial records. I have traced the money to your offshore accounts. I have documentation of payments you received from 3 of our competitors. And I have testimony from Victor Crane, who was very willing to cooperate once he realized he was facing federal charges." The color drained from Daniel's face. "Victor talked?" "Victor did more than talk. He provided evidence, emails, wire transfers, recorded phone calls, including one where you instructed him to, and I quote, 'take care of the old man before he becomes a problem.'" The room gasped. Daniel's carefully constructed mask shattered completely. For the first time, Richard saw the real person beneath, not a charming executive, but a cornered animal, desperate and dangerous. "You don't understand," Daniel spat. "I built this company. I made it what it is. Every deal, every contract, every expansion, that was me. You just sat in your corner office playing the visionary while I did the real work. I deserved that money. I earned it." "You stole it," Richard said quietly, "and you hurt people to cover it up. A young woman lost everything because of you. A good man died with your threats hanging over him. You don't get to claim you earned anything." Detective Chen stepped forward. "Daniel Barrett, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." As Daniel was led away in handcuffs, he turned back to look at Richard one last time. His face was twisted with hatred. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you've started." Richard met his gaze without flinching. "You're right, Daniel. This isn't over. It's just beginning. And for the first time in years, I'm exactly where I need to be." The aftermath was messy, as these things always are. The media picked up the story immediately. CEO exposes longtime partner's betrayal. Thornton Technologies scandal rocks Wall Street. For weeks, Richard's face was on every news channel, his name in every headline. But something unexpected happened. Instead of destroying the company, the scandal actually strengthened it. Investors were impressed by Richard's transparency, his willingness to admit there had been problems, and his decisive action to fix them. Clients appreciated the thorough investigation and the assurance that their data was now secure. Employees, who had long suspected something was wrong but had been afraid to speak up, finally felt safe. And Emma became a symbol of something else entirely. Richard had offered her a job, not out of charity, but because she had proven herself. Her computer skills were exceptional, her business instincts were sharp, and her integrity, forged in the fire of everything she had endured, was unshakable. She started as a junior analyst. Within 6 months, she had been promoted twice. Within a year, she was leading a team of her own. Richard watched her growth with pride. Not the pride of a mentor exactly. Something deeper. He saw in Emma the same determination, the same resilience that had driven him when he was young, and he saw something else, a second chance. For her and for him. A year after the scandal, Richard and Emma stood together on the roof of the Thornton Technologies building, looking out at the city skyline. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in shades of orange and gold. "I've been thinking," Richard said, "about that night in the rain, the night I found you." Emma nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about it too. I used to believe that success was about building something big, something impressive, something that would last. But standing there in that storm, looking at you, I realized I had it backwards. The buildings don't matter. The money doesn't matter. What matters is the people we help along the way, the lives we change, the kindness we show when nobody's watching." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, that same small, tentative smile from a year ago, but stronger now, more certain. "Henry used to say something similar," she said. "He told me that the measure of a person isn't what they build, but what they leave behind. Not money or buildings, but the impact they have on others. The seeds they plant that grow into something bigger than themselves." Richard nodded. He was a wise man. He was, Emma agreed, and he would have been happy to know that his work wasn't for nothing. That in the end, the truth came out. "Because of you," Richard said. "You're the one who brought it to light." Emma shook her head. "No. It was because of you, because you stopped for me that night. Any other person would have walked past, would have seen a girl in the rain and thought it wasn't their problem. But you didn't. You saw me, you cared, and that made all the difference." Richard felt tears prickle at the corners of his eyes. He wasn't a man who cried often, but this moment felt sacred somehow, like a chapter closing and a new one beginning. "I want you to know something, Emma. You didn't just help me save my company. You helped me save myself. After my wife died, I thought I was done. I thought the best part of my life was behind me. But you reminded me that there's always more to give, always more to do. Always more people who need someone to stop for them in the rain. Emma reached out and took his hand. Then let's make sure we keep stopping, both of us, for as long as we can. 3 years later, Emma stood at a podium in front of a crowd of hundreds. The event was the grand opening of the Wallace Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping young people aging out of foster care. It provided housing, education, job training, and most importantly, the one thing Emma had needed most, someone who believed in them. Richard sat in the front row, his eyes shining with pride. "I'm not going to stand up here and pretend that my life was easy," Emma said, her voice strong and clear. "I went through things that no young person should have to face. I was alone. I was afraid. I was ready to give up." She paused, looking out at the audience. But then someone stopped for me, a stranger standing in the rain who saw a girl with nothing and decided she was worth helping. He didn't ask for anything in return. He didn't expect gratitude or payment. He simply saw another human being in need and reached out his hand. Her eyes met Richard's, and she smiled. That single act of kindness changed my life. It gave me hope when I had none. It reminded me that even in a world that can be cruel and unfair, there are good people, people who care, people who see. Emma gestured to the building behind her, the Wallace Foundation headquarters, named in honor of the foster parents who had given her everything. Today we open these doors so that other young people can have the same chance I did, so that no one has to stand alone in the rain, so that when they feel invisible, someone will see them, and when they feel hopeless, someone will believe in them. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling with emotion. Margaret and Henry Wallace taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who choose to love you, the people who stand by you when everything falls apart, the people who stop in the rain. She looked at Richard one more time, her eyes glistening with tears. Richard Thornton was that person for me, and now, with this foundation, we're going to make sure we can be that person for thousands more. The crowd erupted in applause. Richard stood, his own eyes wet, clapping with everything he had. He had built companies. He had made millions. He had achieved every conventional measure of success. But this was his greatest accomplishment, not the buildings or the bank accounts, but the simple truth that a single act of kindness, offered freely and without expectation, had rippled outward to change the world. After the ceremony, Richard and Emma walked through the new building together. It was beautiful, bright and welcoming, filled with comfortable furniture and inspiring artwork. There were computer labs, study rooms, a cafeteria, and best of all, private rooms where young people could finally have a space of their own. "You've done something incredible here," Richard said. "We've done something incredible," Emma corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." They stopped in front of a large portrait hanging in the main hallway. It showed Margaret and Henry Wallace smiling, their arms around each other. Beneath it was a simple inscription: "For those who need someone to believe in them, in loving memory of Margaret and Henry Wallace, who believed in everyone." Emma touched the frame gently. "I wish they could have seen this." "They can," Richard said softly. "They're watching. I'm sure of it." Emma nodded, wiping her eyes. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been if you hadn't stopped that night?" Richard considered the question carefully. "I try not to, because the truth is, I was supposed to stop. I don't believe in coincidences. I believe that everything happens for a reason. You came into my life when I needed you most, and I came into yours at exactly the right moment. That's not chance. That's something bigger." Emma leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you believe in destiny?" Richard smiled. "I believe in kindness. I believe that when we reach out to help someone, we're participating in something larger than ourselves. Call it destiny. Call it grace. Call it whatever you want. But I believe that every small act of compassion sends ripples through the universe. And sometimes those ripples come back to us in ways we never expected. He looked at the portrait of Margaret and Henry, at the building full of hope and possibility, at the young woman who had become like a daughter to him. You saved my company, Emma, but more than that, you saved my soul. You reminded me why I started all this in the first place. Not for the money, not for the recognition, but for the chance to make a difference, the chance to matter. Emma squeezed his hand. And you saved me. You gave me a future when I had none. You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. They stood there in silence for a moment, two people whose lives had intersected on a rainy night and had been forever changed. "So, what now?" Emma asked finally. Richard chuckled. "Now? Now we keep going. We keep building. We keep helping. Because that's what life is about. Not the victories or the achievements, but the connections, the moments when we see another person struggling and decide to reach out. The choice every single day to be someone who makes the world a little bit better." Emma nodded, a peaceful smile on her face. "Then let's get started." And so they did. In the years that followed, the Wallace Foundation became one of the most successful youth organizations in the country. Thousands of young people found hope within its walls. Many went on to college, to careers, to lives they had never thought possible. And every single one of them knew the story of how it began, with a CEO who stopped for a girl in the rain and a girl who helped him save everything he thought he had lost. Richard Thornton retired from Thornton Technologies at 65, leaving the company in the capable hands of a new generation of leaders he had personally mentored. He spent his remaining years working with the foundation, speaking to young people, and continuing to do what he had learned was most important, helping others. Emma became the foundation's executive director. She married, had children of her own, and raised them with the same values Margaret and Henry had instilled in her. Every night before her children went to sleep, she told them the same story, about a rainy night, a kind stranger, and the power of a single moment of compassion to change everything. And when people asked her what the secret was, how she had gone from having nothing to building something so beautiful, she always gave the same answer. "Someone stopped for me," she would say. "That's all it takes. One person, one moment, one choice to see someone who is hurting and to help them anyway. You never know whose life you might change. You never know how that small act might ripple outward, touching lives you'll never even know about." She would smile then, the same smile that had first appeared on that rainy night, tentative but full of hope. So the next time you see someone struggling, don't walk past. Don't look away. Stop. Reach out. Because you might be their only chance. And in helping them, you might just find that you've helped yourself in ways you never imagined. The rain still falls, as it always has. It falls on the wealthy and the poor, the powerful and the forgotten. It falls on city streets and lonely corners, on those who have everything and those who have nothing. But somewhere, in every storm, there is a moment of choice, a moment when one person can decide to see another, to stop, to help, to change everything. This is the power we all carry within us, the power to be a shelter from the storm, the power to see the invisible, the power to believe in someone when they cannot believe in themselves. Richard Thornton learned this on a rainy night when he was 55 years old. Emma learned it when she was 19. And now, through the lives they touched and the legacy they built, thousands more are learning it too. Because in the end, the story isn't about a CEO or a company or even a scandal that almost destroyed everything. It's about something much simpler and much more profound. It's about kindness. It's about hope. And it's about the beautiful, unpredictable, miraculous truth that when we choose to help another human being, we never truly know where that choice might lead. Richard helped Emma that night because she was alone and afraid and needed someone to see her. Emma helped Richard the next day because she had information that could save everything he had built. but the truth is, they both saved each other. And in doing so, they created something that would outlast them both, a ripple of compassion spreading outward through time, touching lives yet unborn, inspiring acts of kindness yet unimagined. This is the story, not of a CEO and a poor girl, but of two human beings who found each other at exactly the right moment, who chose to trust, to help, to believe, and who proved once and for all that no act of kindness, however small, is ever wasted.